What a great pleasure it is to welcome back to What's Next Lisa Gibbon, who's the Divisional Executive for Onboarding at Liberty. And we are going to be talking about valid and invalid insurance claims. Hi, Lisa. How are you doing?
Hi, Aki. Doing great, thank you, and nice to be back.
No, it's lovely to have you back. It's a very interesting topic and very topical because you often hear about people getting that whole process wrong. But, I was thinking about this. I mean, it's such a niched topic in this particular industry that we're talking about, the insurance industry. How did you get into the industry, just out of interest? And it's specifically the claims industry. And it's not something you say in high school, I'm going to be, getting involved in the insurance claims industry. I've never heard anybody say that. So how did you get into this?
The quick answer to that is I answered a job advert for a job in the insurance industry, and then ended up actually in the underwriting space, which is where I started my career. But you're right, it's not a career that you actually know about in school. It's one that you hear about through word of mouth or randomly applying for a job that you see in the newspaper in those days. And
Yes.
So both underwriting and claims are jobs that you learn on the job. It's almost like an apprenticeship, You join, you
Yes.
learn about the products, you learn about the process, you get some medical background. So you learn from a mentor, and if you're lucky, you have a really good mentor. And in a couple of years, you get into a space where you have sufficient knowledge to actually assess claims or to assess new policies for life insurance. So that's how I got into it. But yes, you're right. It's not something that you look for doing when you're at school,
Yeah. Listen, it's very interesting. It's a very interesting, and the process is quite interesting, which is what I want to unpack with you. If you can explain that process of determining the validity of a claim, what exactly is that process, and how do you determine if it's valid? Can you go through that for us, please?
Sure. Okay. So the process is actually really simple. The client has a policy, they think they have a claim, and they submit a claim for a benefit. And that could be any kind of benefit. So it could be a death claim, in which case the life assurance beneficiaries would submit a claim, or it could be a disability claim, or it could be a critical illness claim, retrenchment claim. So they're very different benefits that you can apply for a claim for. So depending on the benefit, there's a list of requirements that the client needs to complete for us. So basically that would be perhaps a claim form, the provision of a death certificate, or the provision of medical evidence to support the claim that they're submitting. And then once we've had all of the information we need, we assess the claim and then go back to the client to say your claim was successful or it wasn't successful. So the process is really simple, but it can take a bit of time, particularly when we're looking for medical information, which can take time to come in. We may need to speak to various different doctors or wait for specific reports. So that takes a little bit of time. But once we've got all the information, the actual assessment of the claim is quite quick.
Okay. So it's pretty straightforward. If you die, for example, it's a death certificate. If you have a disability claim, like let's say you've got some kind of cover and you have a heart attack, or you have some major medical situation that you include in your policy, then you guys will get the reports from the doctors say, okay, this is right, we pay out. So that takes a bit of time, and that's totally understandable. Now, what are some of the common reasons that insurance claims are deemed invalid? And how can customers avoid these pitfalls? Because I think this is such an important topic. You often hear of this happening in the news, that a claim was repudiated, et cetera, et cetera. Talk to us about this, and why are some claims deemed invalid?
Okay, there are a number of reasons. So the first reason that comes to mind is that the client hasn't met the criteria for claims. So let's, for example, say that the client is claiming on their critical illness benefit for blindness. So we have a cutoff of visual impairment that the client needs to reach before we'll pay the claim. So it could be that the client has lost some vision but is not considered legally blind, and our benefit criteria requires that the client is legally blind. So under those circumstances, the client hasn't yet met or hasn't met the criteria for claim, and we wouldn't pay. So that's one reason. Another reason could be that the client is applying for something that we don't actually cover under the benefit. So again, if it's a critical illness claim, we have many, many, many impairments that we cover under critical illness, but we don't have an exhaustive list of, we'll cover every single medical impairment that you've got. So if you have a medical impairment that isn't qualified or doesn't qualify under the list of impairments that we cover, then that also wouldn't be a valid claim. And the third reason, and these are the ones that end up in the news, these are the ones we hear about, is where the client hasn't fully disclosed all information at the time that we underwrite. So when we underwrite a new application for life cover, for risk, for any benefit, we try and build a picture of what the client's risk is and the risk that the client constitutes for the insurer. And based on the information we get from the client or the client's doctors or any other reports that are submitted, we then come to a final decision on the terms at which the cover is granted. Now, if some of that information is withheld or some of the information is provided inaccurately, then the decision that we make isn't accurate based on the client's health. If this comes to light at claim stage, we then have a look at the at what the decision would have been at the outset, and we basically reconstruct that assessment. So what we say is, if we'd known about whatever the client hadn't disclosed, so let's, for example, say the client hadn't disclosed that they had a visual impairment, and we didn't know that, and then we gave standard rates for their living benefits. But at the time of claim, the client now discloses that, in fact, they do have a visual impairment, and we would have imposed an exclusion clause for that. We will then reconstruct the policy to impose the exclusion clause, irrespective of what the claim's for. So the client comes in and they claim for diabetes, and in the process of validating that claim, we noticed that there was visual impairment that we hadn't had the opportunity to underwrite. We'll then reassess and provide a new decision and then continue with the assessment of the claim.
Okay, that's pretty straightforward. So transparency is key here. When you apply for any kind of insurance, be completely transparent with whatever's happened to you in your past, your medical history. Don't try and hide things because it can come back to bite you. So what does Liberty do to help its clients deal with invalid insurance claims? Is there anything that you can do?
Okay, so we have two areas where we can assist. So if a client has applied for a claim or the client has submitted a claim and the claim is invalid, we will provide the client with full information as to why that claim is not invalid, and presumably that will help them in future when they submit a claim. It becomes really difficult if the client has non-disclosed something for which we wouldn't have offered cover. So say, for example, the client was involved in criminal proceedings and we wouldn't have accepted the risk at the time of application, then we may actually cancel the policy, and then there can be no claim for any reason on the policy. But other times, a claim can be paid, but the conditions of the policy are adjusted to take into account the non-disclosure. So that's at claim stage. We provide as much information as we can as to the reasons why the claim was invalid and potentially what the client can do to address that. The other thing that we do is at the onboarding stage. There are a number of instances where we help the client to disclose fully. So when the client applies for cover and we take them through a tele-interview, the tele-interviewer will tell them at the outset, you please need to disclose absolutely everything, because if you don't, this may impact you on claim stage. So that is actually stated. And then the tele-assessors are quite skilled in asking the right kinds of questions, and they will assist the client if the client doesn't know certain terminology or other things. So there's quite a lot of assistance through the onboarding process. And at the end of the interview, we also provide the client with a transcript of what they've disclosed. So at their leisure, they can reread it, so they have another opportunity, because you and I both know, the older you get, the more you forget. And when you're reading the transcript, then you might think, oh my word, I forgot to tell them X, Y, and Z. And then through your advisor, you can come back to us to say, I forgot to tell you that I broke my leg last year. Is this going to be important? But you're so right. The key really is disclose everything. Whether you think it's important or you don't think it's important, it doesn't matter. Just disclose everything, and that's the safest route to go.
And I mean, for example, I'll paint you a scenario. Let's say I am a doctor or I'm a truck driver, for example, and I get a job to go and I join Doctors Without Borders. So hypothetically speaking, and they work in dangerous areas. That's something that I need to disclose to my insurance company, right? Things have changed. I used to work in Joburg. Now I'm taking a job in a dangerous region, and my insurance policy cover might not be valid if I do this, and I don't tell my insurance company, right? Because in those clauses, there are certain things that preclude you from going into a war zone, for example, or working in a war zone, I guess.
Yeah, okay, so when it comes to occupation, we're quite clear on that. If there's any change in your occupation or the nature of your job, so you're still a doctor, but you're not working at Netcare in Midrand anymore. You're now working as a member of Doctors Without Borders, then you are required to notify the insurer. So there are some conditions that are notifiable, and your occupation is one of those. Any change in occupation, it's important that you notify the insurer. Now as well, some people do dual occupations. So, I used to just be an underwriter, but now I'm also an underwriter and I'm a caterer, and I'd like to be covered for both occupations. And then I notify my insurer to say I'm now doing a second occupation and I'd like to be covered for that as well. Otherwise, you might find yourself only covered for the one occupation and only for the income that you derive from that occupation. So anything related to do with a job change, it's always important to let your insurer know.
Yeah, and that's such a good point, Lisa, because, often people take out insurance policies in their 20s, right? And they've had, a couple of career path changes throughout their lives. And, come to 45, you might not be doing the same thing you were doing when you were 20, for example, and 30, for example. So important to disclose to your insurance company whatever changes have happened in your particular life, especially with your job. Now, when you look at that transparency that we talk about, what measures has Liberty put in place to ensure transparency and fairness in claim assessments?
Okay, so I think we keep the client informed at all points. So we'll tell the client at the outset, this is the claims process, this is what we're going to need. The client provides the information. And at any point, if we're not able to pay the claim or we are having some difficulty in paying the claim because of lack of information, we have a full discussion with the client at that point. And if we're not able to pay, then we provide them with full information as to what we're not paying and why we're not paying it. Because sometimes we do pay, but we might pay a smaller amount. So say, for example, the client has 100,000 rands worth of income protection cover. And at the time of application, they didn't provide us with any proof of income. And now at the time of claim, they've got a different, not necessarily a different job, but they've got a different income. So now they're only earning 50,000 rand. So at that stage, we won't pay them more than what they're earning, and we'll adjust the amount of cover that we prepare to pay out under claim. So it's not necessarily always that we don't pay the claim, but we may adjust the conditions of payment based on the information available at the time of claim.
This is so interesting. I'm learning so much about this whole process. I mean, I didn't know some of those things. I'm now going to go back and double check all my T's and C's as well. Thank you very much for that. How does that onboarding process help in educating clients about valid and invalid claims? Because by the sounds of it, the way you're explaining it to me is Liberty is quite a thorough process that keeps me as the client, engaged throughout the process and understanding what's going on, because I think that knowledge is very important.
Yeah, okay, 100%. But we work very closely with our advisors as well. So our business is sold through advisors, whether that be a broker or a tied advisor. And the advisor is very involved in that process in guiding the client through the process to say, you will be underwritten, there is going to be a tele-interview, they will be asking questions. Please make sure that you have all of your medications that you take at hand and that you think through what your medical history has looked like over the last 10 or 20 or forever years, just to make sure that the clients are ready for that interview so that when they have the interview, they can disclose fully. And as I said, we also provide just nudges as well to say, please provide us with the full information. We do this at the tele-interview stage. We provide a nudge again in our decision letter. The policy documentation also provides some information around that, as does the list of disclosures that I mentioned earlier on. So we have a number of touch points during the onboarding process where we remind the client of full disclosure. Look, we also, in the process of doing the risk assessment at the outset, is we might send the client for a medical examination, so they have another opportunity to disclose. And there we have a nurse or a doctor who's experienced in this, and they ask questions perhaps in a slightly different way to what we might have asked. And again, it may serve as a reminder for something that the client hasn't remembered. And we do medical tests and we ask for reports. So we try and get information not only from the client, but also from medical practitioners where they do have a history of an impairment, so that on the off chance that they've forgotten something, that we may be able to get that information from medical reports. So we try and get as much information as we possibly can. We also structure our application form and our questions in such a way that we try and it's almost like a little reminder. So within the question, we have a number of nudges that will help the client remember something that they might ordinarily not have actually thought of in a long time because it was an impairment that happened quite a long time ago. So throughout the onboarding process, with the questioning, the examinations, and the risk assessment, we look for opportunities to help clients disclose to us fully.
Fantastic. And how does that onboarding process help in educating clients about valid and invalid claims? Because I guess, indirectly with all the questions that you ask, you're actually making me as the customer think and say, oh, okay, I haven't mentioned this, I haven't mentioned that. And I think that you iron out a lot of the gray areas through this question phase that you talk about in the testing, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, Aki, so the onboarding process really focuses more on onboarding and full disclosure. So there isn't an explicit discussion with clients at that point around a valid or an invalid claim. It's provided in the documentation and there are nudges in the interviews, but there isn't a full discussion with the client around this will be a valid claim and this will be an invalid claim. That's provided through the policy documentation, through the advisor, and then the advisors also have quite a lot of collateral that they can share with clients when they do the onboarding process with us for the clients. That'll help them understand what will and won't be a valid claim. Look, I think the other thing as well is that the clients need to understand the product that they're covered for. So if you're looking for income protection, you shouldn't be necessarily taking out a critical illness benefit to cover your income because they're different benefits that serve different purposes. So we are very reliant also on our advisors to guide the clients through that process to make sure that they have the right product, that they do full disclosure during the risk assessment process, and once they have their final decision, to know exactly what they're covered for and what is contained in their policy documentation.
Lisa, this was so informative. I've learned so much. Thank you very, very much for your time. Lisa Gibbon, who's the Divisional Executive for Onboarding, talking to us about, the whole process of when you go for any kind of insurance, life or disability, et cetera, that transparency process is so important. And talking to us about valid and invalid insurance claims. Lisa, great to chat to you again.
Thanks very much, Aki.